Welcome to episode 142 of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerri Williams. I'm a retired agent writing crime fiction inspired by true crime FBI cases. Today, we get to speak to former agent Asha Rangappa, who served in the FBI for 3 years. She was assigned to the New York Division and specialized in counterintelligence investigations. In this episode, Asha Rangappa reviews Russian interference and how the FBI's counterintelligence agents, along with the entire intelligence community, is addressing the threat. During her time in the Bureau, Asha Rangappa assessed threats to national security, conducted classified investigations on suspected foreign agents, and performed undercover work. She gained experience in intelligence tradecraft, electronic surveillance, interview and interrogation techniques, and the use of firearms and deadly force. After leaving the FBI, Asha was an associate dean at Yale Law School. She also taught national security law and related courses at Yale University, Wesleyan University, and the University of New Haven. Currently, she's a senior lecturer at Yale University's Jackson Institute for Global Affairs. She has published op-eds in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal, among others, and has appeared on NPR, BBC, and other major television networks. She is an editor for Just Security and is currently a legal and national security analyst for CNN. You can find more about Asha Rangappa on her website, asharangappa.com. I'm sure many of you have seen Asha on TV, and you can understand how excited I am that she agreed to do this show. And if you're listening to this episode on the day it officially comes out, November the 15th, then let's collectively, on 3, say happy birthday to Asha. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Happy birthday, Asha! Good job. I'm sure she'll appreciate that. I think you're going to really enjoy this episode, especially if you listen to last week's episode with Bill Kinane. He set us up, telling us about our initial relationships with Russia right after the Cold War. And with this episode, Asha brings us up to date. As you know, I don't do politics on this podcast, and I even took the devil's advocate role, always asking questions and asking for facts. So this is a safe, non-partisan interview. But before we get to the interview, I want to remind you that in my November reader team emailed that not only am I celebrating my 10 years of retirement with photos from my career, but anybody who gets that email is eligible for my November giveaway. I'm giving away a You Can't Get This Anywhere Else FBI holiday ornament, other FBI swag, and podcast cards, stickers, and buttons. I say other FBI swag because I need to make a trip to the FBI store in the Philadelphia division and pick up a few things, but I'm sure I'll throw in a challenge coin and a lapel pin along with that holiday ornament. If you're not a member of my reader team, you can sign up at my website, jerriwilliams.com, on my Facebook page, Jerri Williams Author, and if you're listening to this on a podcast app that supports links, you should be able to sign up right where the podcast app describes this episode. After the interview, I'll talk about my appearance on Unstructured Podcast, tell you about a new Watergate episode that features a friend of ours, and give you the latest on my progress on my next book, FBI and Film and Fiction. But for now, thank you, and here's the show. I am excited to introduce my guest, Asha Rangappa. Hi, Asha.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing great, and I am so excited to have you on the show. one of my listeners, Diane, hi Diane, asked me to see if I can get you on the show. And a few weeks ago, I was looking at the Grapevine. And for those of you who are listening who don't know, the Grapevine is the monthly magazine that's put out by the Society of Former Special Agents of the FBI. It's a glossy magazine with lots of photos, and I saw you in the magazine at a New Haven Division firearms shoot.
That's right. That's right. We go out once a year to Middletown, Connecticut, and the Middletown Police Department has a range out there that they allow us to use for our firearms shoot.
So when I saw that photo, I assumed that you would be in the society directory, and you were, and I reached out to you and was thrilled that you accepted my invitation. You know, I see you on TV all the time, so I know how busy you are. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
And although the podcast is titled FBI Retired Case File Review, I've had the opportunity to have several former agents on the show, and I am always curious as to why they left. As you know, the FBI has a very low attrition rate, about 0.8%. So if you don't mind, at the end of the show, I'm going to ask you why you left us.
Sure.
Great. Well, let's get started. And I didn't share this with you, but the episode that I'm going to post the week before I post yours is going to be an interview with Bill Kinane. Do you know Bill?
I don't. The name sounds vaguely familiar, but I'm not recollecting at this moment.
Bill's a retired agent, and he was the legat for the FBI's office in Moscow for 5 years, sometime between 1994 and 2000.
Oh, wow.
I'm actually interviewing you first, but I'll probably post Bill's episode before I post your episode, because Bill's going to be able to take us from the very beginning when he was the legat or the ALAT. It was the first time the FBI had a presence in Russia. He's going to be talking about Russian organized crime and money laundering and human trafficking, you know, some of the criminal cases that he worked out of Russia. So it's going to be a fascinating interview. I can't wait to hear it. But you are going to be talking about what's going on with Russia now. So you'll be talking to us about counterintelligence and Russian interference, because that's your thing.
That's my thing. That's the side that I was on when I was in the Bureau. And as you know, Jerry, those are two different worlds within the FBI. And when most people think of the FBI, I think they think of the criminal side. That's what you normally see on TV shows and when people talk about their cases, probably on your show. But there is this whole other world that I think the public is just starting to get a glimpse into with all of this recent Russia stuff.
Why don't you start by giving everyone a 101 on counterintelligence?
Sure. So the FBI, as I just mentioned to you, Jerry, has two main mandates. One is to investigate violations of federal criminal law. That's the criminal side. And then they have a national security mandate, and that is to investigate potential threats to national security. And this can encompass, now there's a cyber division, so, you know, cyber and counterterrorism can kind of straddle both of those ideas of criminal and national security. But counterintelligence is kind of its own thing. Counterintelligence is about foreign intelligence activity in the United States. Now, everybody knows that we have a CIA. We send spies to other countries to collect secrets and find out what other countries are doing. So other countries do the same thing. They send spies here, and it's the FBI's job to keep tabs on what they're doing, stop them when they're doing something very bad. And the Holy Grail, of course, is to try to recruit some of these spies to work for the U.S.
Can you relate that to our national security? Why does it matter?
Well, it matters because it impacts our competitiveness in the world. It can also impact our safety. And this really depends on what country it is and what their intelligence services are doing. So Some countries will engage in traditional espionage. This could be trying to steal defense secrets, for example, figure out what kind of weapons we're making or what our military plans are. Now, one of our biggest threats is also economic espionage. There are countries, most notably China, which will come and steal things like trade secrets or intellectual property. And that's a danger to us because that allows them to become more competitive economically without having to spend the money on research and development the way that we do. And of course, it disadvantages our entrepreneurs and companies when they are able to produce things much more cheaply. Then there are also other kinds of intelligence activity. And this can involve some of the stuff that we've been seeing on, since 2016 with Russia. And this involves things like political influence, trying to get people who have power to do things that are favorable to their country policy-wise, spreading misinformation and propaganda. This is kind of we are paying more attention to it now, but it's been a problem ever since World War II with the Nazis and also with communism. So there's all kinds of different intelligence operations that countries try to execute in the United States, and they can be threatening to our national security in different ways.
So when it comes to Russia, could you tell us what things they are doing here in the United States that the FBI counterintelligence agents are trying to detect and to stop?
Right. So Russian intelligence has been around for a long time, and they are very good at what they do. And they're a little bit different than the way that our CIA operates in other countries. So, for example, our CIA is mainly focused on something that we call in the intelligence world collection. So this is what I was mentioning before, collecting secrets. They might be defense secrets or government secrets or economic secrets, whatever it is, but it's collection. It's gathering information to bring back that allows our government, our administration to make decisions. In Russia, and this goes back to the KGB, they do collect information and secrets, but another big part of their intelligence approach is subversion. And that involves actually thwarting the people or the countries that they consider to be their adversaries. And the United States is Russia's number one adversary. And even though we think the Cold War is over, that shift didn't really change Russia's approach. So when it comes to things like political influence and disinformation, some of this is to further Russia's own foreign policy goals, such as breaking up NATO so that they can also be on equal footing in the world on the world stage. But a lot of it is about trying to weaken American society from the inside. And I'll talk about it more, Jerri, but the most nefarious part of it is that they use our own weaknesses against ourselves to make Americans actually turn against other Americans as a way to weaken our democratic fabric and principles.
All right, now you really have me sitting up in my seat because that sounds devious. That sounds nefarious. So, yeah, you got to keep talking. Tell us more.
Well, so I'm teaching a class right now at Yale at the Jackson Institute for Global Affairs, where I'm on the faculty, and it's called Russian Intelligence, Information Warfare, and Social Media. And one of the things that we do is look at Russian intelligence operations going from the KGB to the present. And as I mentioned, this has been a continuous theme. So the idea here is using Sun Tzu's art of war in the sense, it's like playing judo with your enemy. You're using the forces that you see, the weak forces or the weaknesses in your adversary to basically create momentum so that the enemy destroys itself. And for us, we have a number of weaknesses in our society, and they are usually the things that we are incredibly divided about. Race, a lot of social issues. At this point, over the last half decade, political polarization. I mean, simple political parties. And what Russia does is they take these issues that they know are kind of smoking under the surface, and they fan the flames and make it something that we get really emotionally charged up about. And one of the things that they are able to do now is use social media. That's not something that they had during the Cold War, but now they have this tool that allows them to fan the flames very quickly and in a very provocative and toxic way. And so, for example, during 2016, what we now know, what, for example, Mueller's investigation has found, what the Senate Intelligence Committee has found, is that Russia used Facebook not only to circulate memes and posts that got people really antagonistic towards the other Americans on other sides of issues like gun rights or immigration, but they also created actual protests where for one group they would say, show up and fight for immigrant rights on this day. And then to another group, they would say, show up and stand up for, secure borders on this day. And it would be the same day, at the same time, in the same place. And people would then be showing up, these are actual Americans, screaming at each other, not realizing that they were actually acting as puppets of the Russian government.
So these were real Americans with real social issues and concerns, but they had no idea that they were being manipulated to be in the same place at the same time?
Right. And, they are real issues, and these are things that these people really cared about. But the way that Russia, the kinds of posts and memes that they would use to get people riled up were incredibly inflammatory towards the other side, to get them to a point where they couldn't really, or they wouldn't be open to having a dialogue, which is the way that we in America and as a democracy want to operate. We want to disagree about things, but we want to do it civilly. We want to use our deliberative processes to come to compromises or policy solutions, not scream at each other and shoot at each other. And so it's an incredibly destructive way to manipulate people. And in some cases, Jerri, and this kind of goes beyond even particular issues, Russia would actually circulate false information, conspiracy theories that, so for example, Pizzagate, this was a conspiracy that Hillary Clinton and the Democratic Party were running a pedophile ring in the basement of a pizza parlor. This actually got someone to pick up a gun and go to that pizza parlor and start shooting. And no one, as I understand it, no one was injured there. But for Russia, that's a huge win. If they can get people to go from looking at their computers to fighting at each other, screaming at each other across a protest line, to literally picking up a gun and going and killing each other, for them, that is the ultimate goal of subverting American society from the inside out.
I recall reading about that scenario that you just mentioned, in the newspaper. And, it really boggles my mind that somebody would believe that. Now, of course, I'm a trained investigator, but it was so far-fetched and over the top. I mean, why would anybody believe that, especially since it was out in the public? If that information was out there, why wouldn't someone believe that law enforcement would take care of that?
One of the things to remember is that also a part of the subversion is not just to get us to fight with each other, but to cause us to lose faith in our institutions and our own government. Mm. And first and foremost, among those is law enforcement and the courts. The idea is to get people to start becoming cynical and jaded and say, these are all corrupt people. They're not going to be out there protecting me or fighting for my rights. They are just, they won't do anything, or they're corrupt. So, we have seen some of this. A lot of the misinformation that's put out is to undermine and denigrate law enforcement, in particular the FBI. to make people believe that they are acting on political motives, not based on evidence. So this all goes hand in hand. When people get sucked into these conspiracy theories, they're not going to believe that the law enforcement is going to be taking care of it if it was a real problem.
Let me ask you a question, because you just said something that someone who could be listening to this may have been caught up in. They may actually think that our whole conversation is political and doubt what you're telling us. What can we say to them that would help them believe what you're saying? I mean, what kind of information, what kind of evidence do you have that the Russians are doing this?
Yes, so there's actually been several places where this information has been collected. So one is the Senate Intelligence Committee that's been investigating Russian interference in the election for a while, and they actually released many of the Facebook ads that were being circulated by Russia. And it's important for your listeners to understand that what Russia does is they target both sides. So this isn't just something that's happening on the far right. This is the far right and the far left. Any extreme that they can manipulate and take advantage of is to their benefit. And so things like abolish ICE or abolish, the government, that's a far left thing that they are happy to do too, because getting people to become anarchists who want to, do away with the government for them is just as beneficial. So, one of the ways to understand that this is not political is to understand that they are using extremes on either side as a way to foment division. But the Senate Intelligence Committee is one, and you can look at the history. They also had hearings with Facebook on this issue. And another is that Robert Mueller, the special counsel, actually indicted 13 Russian individuals and 3 Russian companies for their social media and disinformation campaigns. And if you read his indictment, that actually lays out exactly how they were doing this, and including the protests and the ways that they were manipulating both the right and the left. So, I think when I talk about this to groups, I know that sometimes it's hard for people who aren't on social media to understand this. And I think that's a key part of it, is the way that technology actually sucks us into these isolated universes where we are hearing and seeing things that kind of agree with the way that we already see the world. And we're very separated from people who are thinking differently. So when you ask, how can somebody go down this rabbit hole of these conspiracy theories, at the very far ends of either side of the political spectrum, there are these silos where these kinds of things flourish.
Well, let me take this beyond social media, and I do want to get back to social media, but let's talk a little bit about cable news. Because if you turn on cable news, whether you're watching Fox or MSNBC or CNN, there'll be some people who will say the same thing about extreme opinions on both sides. I'm not watching Fox. I'm either watching CNN or MSNBC. But when there is an issue, a hot issue, I like to turn to Fox to see if they're covering the same issue. And most likely they are not. And that goes the other way. When there is a hot issue that Fox is covering, I'm sure they turn to CNN or MSNBC, and this issue that Fox thinks is important is not being covered there. So what you're telling us is that we're all playing into this, aren't we?
We are all complicit in this. And I absolutely agree with you. Actually, 24-hour cable news is a part of this trend in technology and communications that really has allowed this to become a vulnerability that can be exploited by outside actors. So it's not just social media. You're absolutely right. Just think about it, Jerri. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, people would go to work. They weren't online. They came home. They watched, one of a few network cable news shows in the evening. generally people were watching the same things and we were all sharing the same set of facts. We might interpret them differently. You might still disagree with some anchors or some presentations of news, but we were all kind of, sharing a similar reality. With the proliferation of cable news outlets, online outlets, and the fact that social media can have these things travel to within so many different chambers, we're really all consuming very different sets of news that are being filtered through different sets of biases, and then we are adopting them. And I think you're absolutely right. If you watch a certain set of news and then you step into a different bubble, you will feel like you are on another planet. And this is really dangerous because it means that we're not just operating from a different set of shared facts, but we're also starting to fragment shared values that we all have or ought to have as Americans. Things like respect for freedom and tolerance and, things like free press, like we should just support, this should be a democratic principle. And if you look around, some of those things, in addition to, faith in courts and law enforcement and other institutions, are really being broken down, often along political lines. And I think that's where the real danger lies.
Absolutely. And even for myself, I can tell you that before, say, 2015, I wasn't on social media. I might have had a Facebook account, but I wasn't using it. And I definitely wasn't on Twitter. And then I became an author and I started this podcast, and now social media is my thing. I'm on it all the time. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. When I look at some of the tweets and posts that people I know, former colleagues and just friends, the things that they're posting, I'm appalled at the nastiness, the vitriol, the ugliness that they're spreading. I'm just amazed. I just make sure that I stay out of all of that because it's just so toxic.
It's very toxic, and actually partly from teaching this class and, and my students have started to feel the same way. By the way, to go to your media bubbles viewpoint, I actually make my students each choose a different outlet each week that kind of spans the political spectrum, and they analyze it and report on it. And they're getting a sense for how different news is interpreted along, even on major outlets and networks. And I think it's making them more aware of what they are consuming and also how they're consuming it. And it's inspired me, Jerri, I want to cut back on social media much more, because one of the things that we are also studying is something called social capital, which is how we create relationships with each other and how important those are for a democratic society. And the lack of human interaction is something that is a huge threat, I think, to our democratic fabric. The fact that we don't interact anymore in public spaces and we're not organically talking and meeting people who come from different backgrounds and, have different views and experiences. We're all doing this through a screen. And so I've discovered that your new Apple operating system actually has a screen time monitor.
Yes, I saw that.
Yeah, and one of mine is to get out of Twitter and start actually like being in the world and talking to people for exactly the reason that you mentioned. It's incredibly toxic. It can start distorting how you see people and see entire groups of people. You start thinking of all Republicans as this, or all Democrats as this, or all immigrants as that, and that is a very dangerous road to go down. It doesn't matter what label you put on them. It's just not how you want to be interacting with other humans.
Why now? Because I think you said that we've known that Russia has been playing in this disinformation field for a long time. So why now? Why wasn't it stopped? Why didn't we do something about it?
Well, we have a few barriers. So number one, I think, is our own naivete. And I'll be interested to see when you interview the Legat from Moscow, what he thinks about U.S.-Russia relations. But I do think that after the Cold War, we have not felt that we need to be as vigilant on this front. We have been very focused on terrorism, as you know, post 9/11, almost, so much of our resources has gone to counterterrorism. So counterintelligence, and particularly with, again, what Russia was doing was not on the top of our list. And I think we've always thought of social media as being something benign and even being something positive. It connects people, it helps you find your old high school friends. And so to think of it as a weapon that's being used against us is just not how I think we approached this particular technology. The other thing is legal. So Jerri, as you know, I'm a lawyer. And so when I was in the FBI, I worked a lot of propaganda cases. In the FBI, they're known as perception management operations. And these are using, at the time, this was pre-social media, analog, media outlets like newspapers to place particular kinds of articles or op-eds and stuff like that. It's very hard for the FBI to investigate these because we have a First Amendment. And as you may know, Jerri, the FBI and the First Amendment are two great tastes that don't go great together. And the FBI is very loath to get near anything that will make it appear as though they are trying to censor any kind of expression. So there's very little they can do unless they can definitively show that there is an intelligence operation going on. And to do that, they actually need, in the case of social media, these platforms' cooperation. They need Facebook, they need Twitter to help them. And so...
And are they?
Well, not really. For a long time, Facebook actually denied that this was even happening on their platform. And it was only as I think the FBI's investigation on, the intelligence front started to reveal that this was happening, that they started to come clean, and they keep coming out with more and more. But we, I think partly we're kind of stuck until there's any kind of regulation. We can debate whether or not that's a great idea, but on the goodwill of these platforms to police their, what's happening on there. And a lot of these, remember, from Russia are fake accounts that are coming out of a government apparatus called the Internet Research Agency, which I'll describe in a moment. But these platforms don't have a financial incentive to really try to stop this stuff. They make money through advertising revenue. They get advertising revenue by having as many users as possible and by collecting as much information on those users so that advertisers can target them in very, very specific ways. That specific targeting is exactly what Russia used to do what it did. For these platforms like Twitter or Facebook to try to dismantle that or muddy it up actually then destroys their entire financial model.
Wow, you're making me look at that in a totally different way, because as an author, I appreciate the fact that if I did want to advertise my books on Facebook, I could target specific readers. So something that's good for people who want to market something is being used for evil.
Yeah, and because of things, because of First Amendment restrictions, it's not like we're not Russia, we're not China. We're not going to just shut them down or try to police the content. So we're at a little bit of a crossroads on how we're going to deal with this, because what's happening is our very freedoms, our First Amendment, our right to expression is being weaponized against us. And make no mistake, Russia knows exactly what our laws are. They know exactly how to use them in such a way that the limitations that we have on trying to stop them, and they take advantage of that. One of the things I wanted to add, because this is just so creepy and kind of like 1984, but it's true. And this goes to the earlier question on how do we know and the proof. In Russia, there is a company called the Internet Research Agency. This is actually an office building. It's a 4-story office building. It is owned by a Russian oligarch with close ties to Vladimir Putin. And I believe he used to be Vladimir Putin's caterer. They call him the chef. It's a 4-story office building. They hire people just like any other office would. They work in 12-hour shifts. And basically the job here of the people who work there is to come up with fake accounts, create false material, design memes to get people on either side of a highly charged issue all riled up. And that's what they do for 12 hours a day in rotating 12-hour shifts, so 24 hours a day.
What did you say the name of the agency is?
The Internet Research Agency.
It sounds so benign.
It sounds like a normal place where they're doing research, but actually they have quotas. They have to tweet a certain number of times or create a certain number of false articles. And this is literally people's jobs. And they're doing this in a number of countries, by the way. So they actually have one division, which is just the America division. And the people who work there they are supposed to monitor political issues in the United States, figure out which ones, they get talking points every day on nasty things to tweet to people on either side. They troll people. So this is a job, a government job, basically, in Russia. And, we're here kind of we don't really have a coherent response on how to fight that.
What other countries are they targeting, and how do we know this?
So you can Google Internet Research Agency. There's a number of reputable, news organizations that have done profiles on it. This is also featured in Mueller's indictment. It may have been explored in the Senate Intelligence Committee, but you also have a number of research think tanks, like places like RAND and other think tanks that have looked at the output of this particular entity. And in Europe, the reason that we know that they're doing this in other countries is that in other countries, they have been taking this very seriously. So there's something called the near abroad. This is a Russian term to talk about kind of the former Soviet republics. So they are very active there, and they have different goals in different places. In those areas, what they're trying to do is appeal to ethnic Russians, to talk to them about, making Russia great again. It used to be this great empire. And the idea there is to, again, sow discord, but also to potentially create enough disruption as a precursor to taking back some of its territory, as they did in Crimea, or and in other, and to try to lay the groundwork to do some of that around there. So that's part of it there. A lot of it is to also disrupt the elections, put in pro-Putin regimes so that, they can further Russia's goals. Then there's the far abroad, and that includes the United States. But Europe is another area where they are using these techniques, and often appealing to disruptive far-right movements in politics and in national elections. We saw, for example, that they were mounting a campaign leading up to the French elections last year, to the point where I believe the French government actually closed down social media or something for a few days before the election, because they were very worried that it was going to impact the turnout or kind of how people were approaching the election. So this is not something that is only being done in the United States. It's being done with different goals, perhaps in the United States than in Europe or in the former Soviet republics. But this is a part of their general intelligence MO, which, they are doing to some degree of success in a lot of places.
Well, unfortunately, I think you're right about that. So if we could focus now on the FBI. So what's the FBI's role? What is the FBI doing right now as an intelligence-driven agency to detect this and prevent it What's the FBI doing about this?
Yeah. So we can even zoom back and not make it just about Russia. With any of these countries and their operations, when you're working intelligence, you have three goals: identify, monitor, and neutralize. Identify means you figure out who the spies are and, where they are. Most foreign intelligence officers are in the United States acting under what's called diplomatic cover. They are here as diplomats. And this is not unusual. When we send our CIA officers to other countries, they too are typically under diplomatic cover. And a part of the reason for this is that when you're under diplomatic cover, you have diplomatic immunity, which means that if you get caught, even if you're doing something illegal under the laws of that country, you can't be prosecuted. So this offers a certain degree of protection. There are spies who could be here under something called no official cover. NOC is what they're called. And that is much more dangerous. And if people remember, about 8 years ago, there was a roundup of 10 Russian spies who were here posing as Americans. And they were up in Boston and Yonkers, and the FBI arrested them after investigating them for 10 years. Those were people under no official cover. And that's very dangerous because they can be prosecuted and thrown in jail, and their governments can't help them. So that's identifying. You figure out who they are. The second is monitoring them. So this is where you figure out what they're doing. So with Russia, this is a part of the investigation that determined that they were doing these social media, operations. But other intelligence services, like I said, could be stealing secrets or doing other things. So you want to figure out what they're doing. And then the goal is to neutralize. And neutralize means that you render their operation ineffective. So if, for example, you discover that an intelligence service is stealing defense secrets, they have somebody inside the Department of Defense that's giving them classified documents, you might neutralize them by starting to introduce into that information pipeline false information, so that what they're getting, they think they're getting blueprints, but it's blueprints to some kind of defective machine, for example. And the reason that you're not going to suddenly barge in and say, aha, we know what you're doing, is because in intelligence, your advantage comes from making sure that your adversary does not know what you know. It's better for them to keep operating and operating ineffectively than for them to discover that you're onto them, in which case they stop it and then they go back to square one and try something else. And then you have to go figure it out all over again. So this is why, letting them just continue to think that they're operating undetected is better from a U.S. FBI perspective. And ultimately, in neutralizing, you might also discover that somebody working for another country has vulnerabilities. Maybe they really want to live in the United States or want their kids to go to college here, or their mom is really sick and needs an operation that they may not be able to afford in their own country. Or, maybe they just like money. I mean, there's a number of different things. But if you figure out that they have a vulnerability, you have an opportunity to potentially recruit them and get them to become a double agent, which means that they're effectively committing treason against their country and helping the United States by telling us what their country is up to. And that's kind of the holy grail and the ultimate way to neutralize your adversary.
And that's the role of the FBI, those agents that are out there working counterintelligence. So I guess the question is, how do they actually do that?
Well, I think you probably remember, Jerri, when we went through Quantico, they teach you a little bit about interrogation and interviewing and gaining trust and creating rapport. And I think it's the FBI's view that you always get more flies with honey than with vinegar. And, I think one of the great things about being an FBI agent and being able to operate in the U.S. is the U.S. really does have so much to offer. We are a country where people working for other countries come here and they see a lot of possibilities for themselves. And one of the things you do is you train to be able to home in on those, analyze them, and figure out how to make your target believe that this is in their best interest to do. That by helping us, by helping the US, they can help themselves. And once you do that and you start going down that road, it's part of normal psychology that people want to justify their own actions. And so once people start going down a road, they will actually rationalize to themselves what they're doing and continue to help. And as long as you can maintain that trust with them, you can keep that operation going. And this is why, Jerri, it's so disheartening when some of these classified materials have been revealed and sources and methods revealed, because this is the kind of thing happening behind the scenes. A FBI agent tells their source, I'm going to protect you. You're doing something really dangerous. You're committing treason against your country, but I'm going to protect you because we're the good guys. We're going to make sure you're okay. And this is going to ultimately help you. It's going to help the things that you care about. And when we put them at risk like that, even if it's in an isolated case, I think it puts all of those relationships that agents have all over the, country and maybe sometimes even in the world at risk.
So we have talked a lot today about facts, and I believe they're facts because you can actually go to the resource, you can look at the intelligence and see exactly what is happening. So my question to you is that there are lots of people who don't believe any of this. They believe that this whole Russian interference is a hoax. So what do we do to make sure everyone in the U.S. fully understands what's going on and that our leaders support the intelligence community and do something about this?
Yeah, well, I think, Jerri, part of it is because the Russian interference issue has become politicized. And there are political implications of it. I mean, that's a small slice of it. Let's assume that even that nothing happens. All those people are innocent. This is still a threat to us. We don't want foreign adversaries interfering in our democracies. We don't want foreign adversaries hacking into political parties and weaponizing information against our own candidates. This is a bipartisan issue, but unfortunately, it has been politicized. And from a psychological point of view, people are unlikely to change their minds once they already believe something. And they're especially unlikely to do it when the issue is kind of a part of their political identity or affiliation. Because what happens, Jerri, and this is something that in psychology is called directional motivated reasoning. And what this means is we've become so tribal in our political affiliations that believing what my party tells me is true is more important to me as a matter of belonging to that group than the accuracy of the information. In other words, I stick to my beliefs because that's my way of saying I am loyal to this tribe or this group of people or this political party, not necessarily because I actually believe the facts are true. So it's going to be very hard to change the minds. Research shows there's a couple of things that can help. One is that when elites or highly influential people within the tribe, so in this case, like within this political affiliation or party or bubble, say, hey, this is a threat and we all need to take this seriously, that can help. So, for example, Senator Richard Burr, who is on the Senate Intelligence Committee, he's a Republican. He and Mark Warner, the ranking Democrat, have worked very closely on this issue. And I think it's been very admirable that they've taken this very seriously as a bipartisan issue. He is somebody who could speak out forcefully. And I think he has at times to help convince people who are otherwise not inclined to believe it to take it seriously. Another thing that can help, that research shows, is that when you appeal to higher values, in this case, civic mindedness or democratic values, people can transcend their political and tribal loyalties to kind of unite around some common purpose. And what that means is if we start framing this not as something that's being done to Republicans by Democrats, or, like we start framing it in political terms and say, look, this is about, the sanctity of our elections. This is about what the founders of the United States and the Constitution had in mind. They were worried about foreign interference and they wanted to protect against it. This is about protecting the integrity of everybody's vote, about privacy, all of these things that we share as values. We can perhaps start to get out of this very polarizing language that we currently use to talk about this problem.
Okay, so I'm going to continue to play the middle, to play devil's advocate and, talk about facts. And it's my understanding that as of now, there have been no Americans that have been charged with actually being involved in Russian interference or in meddling in the 2016 elections. And that there is no proof or evidence that Russian interference actually altered or changed election results. And again, I'm just playing devil's advocate.
The latter part is true, Jerri, but not the former part. There's no evidence that there were any actual votes that were changed. But actually, a California man was charged and he has pleaded guilty, and he is now cooperating with Special Counsel Mueller for helping to steal identities.
Oh, really?
For Russia, yes, in order for them to create some of these fake accounts on social media. So he's, in terms of that particular aspect of their operation, there has been, at least one American witting American. I think there were some unwitting people who got sucked into this. That will always happen in an intelligence operation. But he's the first, I think, witting American who is kind of knowingly helping in this situation.
Interesting. Very interesting.
His name is, oh my God, I just mentioned him in an op-ed the other day. Pineda, Pineda is, I believe, the last name. I think the first name is Joseph.
Okay, something I didn't know. And I try to stay up on the facts, but it's hard keeping up with all of this.
Yeah, and Jerri, if I can just add in here, we've been talking a lot about social media because I think that's the one that really is going to, it's the one that affects people the most. It's the hardest to understand, and it's the one that I think the solution is in our hands. We have to remember that this is just one part of many, there's also the hacking and intrusion, and there's campaign finance stuff, and, the Russian spy who was sleeping with everybody in the NRA, that's its own thing. And one thing to remember is that any intelligence service will recruit unwittingly or wittingly humans on the ground to help them. And on the social media front, we are, I think you said this at the very beginning, basically being complicit. The more that we participate in kind of polarization and becoming antagonistic towards our fellow citizens.
Yeah, it's really sad. I actually have a neighbor who used to be a friend, and she truly believes in the deep state and that FBI leaders are corrupt, to the point that when certain agents were fired, she sent me texts, almost gleefully saying, "See, I told you," even though she knew my commitment to the FBI and the work that I'm doing today. I read the IG's report. No one's been charged with conspiracy. Maybe something's coming, but I haven't seen it, and certainly she hasn't seen it. It was a friendship that I had to let go.
We have to get back to a place where we can find common ground outside of politics. I mean, as human beings, as Americans, there are more things that we have in common with each other than that we don't have in common. Unfortunately, what happens is that at this point, the only thing that's being amplified anywhere we look is what we don't have in common. That is, I think, becoming incredibly destructive in our relationships. I'm really sorry to hear that.
Yeah, but I wasn't going to let her get away with calling the FBI corrupt. That wasn't going to happen. All right. So can you give me 15 more minutes?
Yeah, sure. What can I tell you?
Well, this is a question that I ask everyone that comes on the show. Why did you join the FBI? And in your particular case, why did you leave us?
Yeah, no. Okay, so I joined the FBI. It's kind of a roundabout story. I really wanted to be an AUSA. That's an assistant U.S. attorney, a federal prosecutor. That's why I went to law school. I went to Yale Law School. And that was my goal. It was my single-minded goal. And it was in law school that I learned that U.S. attorney's offices don't really just hire people coming right out of law school, even out of Yale Law School. They expect you to work for a law firm for a few years, and then you can apply, and they're incredibly competitive jobs. So I knew that I did not want to work for a law firm. And my first summer in law school, I had spent working at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Baltimore. I was working in the white collar division and the environmental crimes division. And one of the trips that we took as summer clerks that summer was to the FBI Academy at Quantico. And we took a tour. I'd never, met FBI agents before. I'd never seen Quantico. And during the tour, one of the things that the tour guide mentioned was that under Hoover, FBI agents were all accountants and lawyers, which when I thought about it made sense because they, typically at that time investigated complex financial crimes. Think Al Capone. So my wheels started turning in my head. And in my third year of law school, I was like, what am I going to do? I knew I was going to be clerking for a federal judge in Puerto Rico. But after that, I didn't have my plan yet. So I said, I'm going to apply to the FBI. And so I applied to the FBI. This was 1999. And I went through the first few phases, but the applicant coordinator at the New Haven division said, look, there's no money in Congress right now to hire. So just so you know, this could take several years before you get through. And so I was like, okay. So I went to my clerkship in Puerto Rico. And at the end of my clerkship, 9/11 happened. And I got a call from the headquarters, and they had my application, and they had it because I had language skills, which they at that point were prioritizing. I speak fluent Spanish, and I speak an Indian language called Kannada. And I had been tested for Spanish, and they actually didn't have any speakers to even test me for Kannada, but I was listed as a speaker of that. So they called me and they said, are you still interested? And I said, yes. So they began expediting my application. And 9 months later, I was at Quantico. And so that's how I ended up in the FBI. And after Quantico, I went directly to New York, and the SAC there put me into the Counterintelligence division, again, because of my language skills. And post 9/11, as you might remember, Jerri, the FBI was really trying to reorganize its priorities and show, the world and Congress in particular that it could do the intelligence thing. So that's how I ended up doing what I was doing.
Didn't I read that you also had some family connections, some family background with the FBI?
So the family background in the FBI came after I joined. So, first, I married another agent. Someone I met at Quantico, and he helped me with my push-ups, which I struggled with at Quantico, and I helped him with the legal stuff. And, then we fell in love and got married. So we were both assigned to New York Division. But when I was in the New York Division, at some point I was talking to headquarters and to the language division or head, and they were asking me if I spoke a particular Indian language, not Kannada, but another one. And I said, no, but my mom speaks that. And he got very excited. And he said, well, does she have a job? I said, well, she's retired. And he said, well, would she be interested in becoming a contract linguist? And I said, well, she might. And so I called my mom and I hooked them up. And the next thing I know, my mom's going through the process and did the whole thing, background check and polygraph. And she became a contract linguist for the FBI. They loved her and they just gave her so much work. And she thought it was just fabulous. She wished she had been doing it the whole time. She's an accountant, by the way. She was like, this is like a soap opera. It's so much more fun than accounting. So yeah, so both at the time, I'm no longer married, but my husband and my mom were both with the FBI for a while. So yeah, those were the family affiliations. And as far as why I left, I did marry another agent, and I don't know if you knew married agents in the Bureau, Jerri, but it's a tough lifestyle for two agents. And we were living in New York. We didn't make a lot of money. We were in a condo in Jersey City and commuting an hour every day. And, we eventually wanted to start a family. And when we were going through that decision-making process, where we were just didn't I wasn't really sure how we were going to make that work. I mean, the whole drill. You can't even take your kids in your bureau car, right? That's illegal. So it's how are we going to get our kid to daycare? So at that time, my former civil procedure professor at Yale Law School had become the dean of Yale Law School, and he was looking for a new dean of admissions for Yale Law School. And he reached out to me, and to me, there were not many things I was really ready to leave the FBI for at that time, but that seemed like a really exciting opportunity, and it made sense with kind of the lifestyle changes that we were contemplating. So I made the move to New Haven and into academia, and I became the dean of admissions at Yale Law School. It turned out that some of my FBI assessment skills came in handy in choosing people to come into Yale Law School. But I did that for 12 years. And then last fall, I was appointed to the faculty at the Jackson Institute at Yale and moved over there.
Well, I can tell you that your plan to become an FBI agent and then an AUSA worked for former FBI Director Louis Freeh. As you recall, he was an agent, then he was an AUSA, then he was a judge before he became director. So who knows what's in store for you?
Yeah, I will say that I am sad that I left when I did. I mean, it was one of those things where I think it made sense at the time. I've loved my time at Yale, but I have gotten nostalgic, and I do wish I could have become a prosecutor. I admire what prosecutors do. It's such important work, and the Department of Justice is, I think, full of great men and women. I know many people who have worked there and at the different offices. And one day, maybe I'll even find a way to work that back into my career too. But
that would be a really good podcast episode for me to have, an agent and an AUSA who worked on the same case doing the case review together. You gave me a great idea. I do want to say that it was the loss for the Bureau that you left because I always talk about the fact that African American women make up less than 1% of the special agent ranks. But when it comes to South Asian American women, I mean, that percentage is not even on the radar.
Yeah, I mean, it is a great career. And I think it is absolutely worthwhile to do. I think, Jerri, you're right that it's historically been something that people do for a whole career, though my understanding is that kind of the new generation, and especially people with things like cyber skills, that the turnover is higher. So, I think of it as service, right? I mean, to go and do it even for a short time is serving your country in a way. I think working for the government is always valuable. It's a way of getting skin in the game. This is your government. You get to make an impact. You get to make a difference. I think, as Jerri, you mentioned, for people of color who are sometimes the communities most affected by law enforcement, I think that it's even more important for those communities to also be a part of law enforcement. So it's so rewarding. It gives you an insight and vantage point that many people don't have, no matter what you go on to do. And I will always value it. I feel like you are forever a part of an amazing, fraternity that is like your family. I think this goes to what you were saying before, that, whatever you think of the individual, you always think of other agents as being a part of your family. So I absolutely agree with you. I would encourage this for anyone. It's a hard process. It's no one's going to lie. It's not easy. It involves several tests, an interview, a very thorough background check, a physical fitness test, a drug test, a polygraph, which is no walk in the park. So you are vetted. And I think, what I always believed after going through that vetting process is that, the FBI really does care about the integrity and character of the people that are in the organization. And I just always have the deepest respect for people who've served in it.
And that's the end of the interview. At jerriwilliams.com, you'll find a photo of Asha Rangappa. You'll find lots of links to articles from the FBI website on counterintelligence and foreign interference. There's an article from the LA Times about that California man who pleaded guilty to aiding in Russian interference, and other fascinating articles on the topic. I hope you enjoyed the episode and that you'll share it with your friends, family, and associates. And don't forget to subscribe to FBI Retired Case File Review on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and in December, Pandora. And of course, all the other popular podcast apps. I don't have a crime fiction recommendation for you. As a matter of fact, it may be a month or so before I have a chance to read for pleasure. I am busy working on FBI and Film and Fiction, a manual for armchair investigators, my next book, nonfiction, based on this podcast, talking about those cliches and misconceptions about the FBI in books, TV, and movies. What I do have for you is two other recommendations. First, I want to recommend that you listen to a podcast called Unstructured. The host is Eric Hunley, and Eric interviewed me on his latest episode, and we had a great time. So I hope you check out Unstructured, available wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. The other recommendation I have for you is a new series on Showtime called Enemies, the President, Justice, and the FBI. Retired Agent John Menderman from episode 121. You remember, on Watergate? Well, he is prominently featured in episode 1 of the series, which starts on November the 18th. So if you have Showtime, you're going to want to check out that 4-part series. And the last thing that I want to say is, don't forget that my books, Pay to Play and Greedy Givers, are available at Amazon.com as ebooks, paperbacks, and Pay to Play is also an audiobook. Please consider picking up one of my books from my Philadelphia Corruption Squad series for yourself or for someone you know who loves crime fiction. They'll make great holiday gifts. This episode is sponsored by FBIRetired.com, the only online directory made available to the general public featuring retired FBI agents and analysts interested in showcasing their skills to secure business opportunities. I want to thank you for listening, and I hope you come back again for another episode of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerri Williams. Thank you.